Why Gaddafi's gold currency was a threat to the West. For the Western world and the North African nation of Libya, the year 2021 will always leave an indelible impression of terror on the one side and victorious accomplishments on the other. This marks precisely a 10-year anniversary of NATO's violent intervention in Libya and the assassination of course of Muammar Gaddafi. As was suspected at that time and was later shown in the published emails of former White House contestant Hillary Clinton, it was clearly published that NATO acted to prevent Gaddafi from accomplishing his plans of founding an African central bank with its own gold-backed currency. The odds were terribly high in favor of the Northern African warlord, as his institution of this African dream would have challenged the power of the dollar and finally allowed Africa to escape its colonial shackles forever. As we all know, the US dollar, followed by the euro, is the most traded currency even at present, and that gives it tremendous value and utmost importance. Now think for a second that a rival currency emerged that wasn't even on the list of the top 15 currencies in the world before. In fact, a brand new currency, and to make matters worse, coming all the way from Africa. What response would you expect from the world power? That's up to you to figure out. Well, based on Hillary Clinton's verified mails, we know that one of the reasons Gaddafi was murdered was to annihilate his gold currency dreams. But the question now is why Gaddafi's gold currency was a threat to the West, to the point of him being placed on the crosshairs of the most professional allied forces in the Western world. Already, we know who Gaddafi was, a Libyan general who rose through military ranks in Libya and abroad and staged various coup attempts that landed him at the center of power, and from 2001 to 2007 revolutionized Libya until his demise. So in this video, we're more deliberately focused us on his gold currency fantasy, so to say. Libyan gold standard coin explained. First of all, let me explain what a Libyan gold standard coin would have actually represented. However, because the project never really saw the light of day, it cannot be accurately measured to the first world currencies. Now, as the saying goes, relevance is established more appropriately in facts without fiction. A Libyan gold standard coin would have allowed foreign powers to dictate Libyan monetary policies. The Americans, in particular, hold most of the world's gold reserves and would have been able to set the price level in Libya as they pleased. Let's say the Federal Reserve Bank, the Bank of England, and the ECB started buying lots of gold. The price of gold on the world market would be driven higher. Libyans could convert their currency for gold, smuggle their gold out of the country, and sell it in foreign markets for a profit. To stem the outflow of gold, the Libyan authorities would be forced, therefore, to devalue their currency, raising the domestic price of gold. If central banks also began dumping lots of gold onto the market, the world price of gold would drastically fall. Libyans could buy gold on foreign markets, smuggle it into Libya and out of Libya, and convert it into dinar. Why would they do this? The same gold would have higher purchasing power in Libya than in foreign economies, so it would be profitable. This would then cause an expansion of the money supply and lead to inflation, superinflation. To prevent this from happening, the Libyan authorities would have to raise the value of the dinar, lowering the domestic price of gold. And of course, they could have a gold standard without convertibility, but that is just a flat currency pretending to be a commodity-backed currency. Not that this is a bad thing, but probably managed fiat currencies are undeniably superior. The gold coin threat. It all started in 2009 when Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, then president of the African Union, suggested to the states of the African continent to switch to a new currency, independent of the American dollar, the gold dinar. The objective of this new currency was to divert oil revenues towards state-controlled funds rather than American banks. In other words, to stop using the dollar for oil transactions altogether. Countries such as Nigeria, Tunisia, Egypt, and Angola were ready to change their currencies. Unfortunately, in March 2011, the NATO-led coalition began a military intervention in Libya in the name of freedom. Free water, almost free gasoline, free health systems, and free education were commonplace for Libyans under Gaddafi's dictatorship at the time. The leader, who has been in power for 41 years, has managed to gain the support of all the major tribes and buy social peace through radical measures and a policy of shared oil revenues. Jihadism, the number one enemy of the West, Gaddafi eliminated it with napalm in the 1990s. Although he had his dark sides, for example, he financed many armed groups in the Sahel. Libya itself was a stable country where the risk of being kidnapped or even murdered by an army militia was non-existent. With an excellent management of oil revenues, the Libyan state had managed to store hundreds of tons of gold. approximately 143 tons according to WikiLeaks, and the same amount in silver. All these resources were going to make Libya the most influential country in all of Africa, supplanting France, for example. Gaddafi wanted to avoid American influences in his oil transactions by using this gold. He launched the Gold Dinar project, and other major African governments were ready to support him and buy into his project. It was going to be both an African dream, but yet a nightmare for the West financial system. Before 2011, Libya had achieved economic independence with its own water, its own food and oil, and its own money, and its own state-owned bank. It had risen under Gaddafi from one of the poorest of countries in Africa to the richest. Education and medical treatment were completely free. Having a home was considered a human right, and Libyans participated in an original system of local democracy. The country boasted the world's largest irrigation system, the Great Man-Made River Project, which brought water from the deserts to the cities and coastal areas, and Gaddafi was embarking on a program to spread his model throughout Africa. But that was before US NATO forces bombed the irrigation system and wreaked havoc on the country. During the term of President Obama, the situation on the ground in Libya was so bad that he asked his advisors to drop options including a new military front in Libya. The Defense Department was reportedly standing ready with the full spectrum of military operations required. The Secretary of State's victory lap was indeed premature if what we're talking about is the officially stated goal of humanitarian intervention, but Clinton's emails revealed another agenda behind the Libyan war. That one, it seems, was achieved. Toppling the global financial scheme. You see, Gaddafi's threatened attempt to establish an independent African currency was not taken lightly by Western interest. In 2011, Sarkozy reportedly called the Libyan leader a threat to the financial security of the world. How could this tiny country of 6 million people pose such a threat, he wondered. The Western concept of creating money is that it is a rigorous process carried out only via banks and not governments. They've been responsible for creating most of the money in the Western economies. This has been going on for centuries, through the process called fractional reserve lending. Originally, the reserves were in gold. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt replaced gold domestically with a central bank-created reserves, but gold remained the reserve currency internationally. In 1944, the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank were created in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to unify this bank-created money system globally. An IMF ruling said that no paper money could have gold backing. Effectively, this meant that the money supply was now created privately as debt at interest. This system requires a continuous supply of debtors, and over the next half-century, most developing countries wound up in debt to the IMF. The loans came with strings attached, including structural adjustments, policies involving austerity measures, and privatization of public assets. After 1944, the US dollar traded interchangeably with gold as global reserve currency. When the US was no longer able to maintain the dollar's gold backing in the 1970s, it made a deal with the OPEC to back the dollar with oil, creating the petrodollar. Oil would be sold in the US dollars, which would be deposited in Wall Street and other international banks. In 2001, dissatisfied with the shrinking value of the dollars that the OPEC was getting for its oil, Iraq's Saddam Hussein broke the pact and sold oil in euros. Regime change swiftly followed, accompanied by widespread destruction of the country. If you're keenly following, you realize that in general, the West and Europe generally put off stiff resistance whenever there is a disfavoring development from the African continent, especially one having to do with economy and financial structuring. In this case, for Libya, it would be more than that from Libya because they were rapidly breaking all ties with post-colonial influences. Inasmuch as Gaddafi had a cult of personality and he was quite a ruthless dictator, oftentimes referred to by the press as a mad dog, there is no denying the steadfast revolutionary ambitions that he was sworn to accomplish in Africa and the world at large. NATO's intentions exposed. Apparently, therefore, violent intervention by NATO in response to the West's dire need to oust Gaddafi from power was not chiefly about the security of the people or the human rights as they claimed. It was more about money and oil and the security of global banking. In Libya, Gaddafi also broke the pact, but he did more than that, more than just sell his oil in another currency, as these developments were detailed by blogger Dennis Ryan. For decades, he said, Libya and other African countries had been attempting to create a Pan-African gold standard, a Pan-African hard currency. Libya's Gaddafi conceived and financed a plan to unify the sovereign states of Africa with one gold currency, United States of Africa. In 2004, a Pan-African parliament of 53 nations laid plans for the African Economic Community with a single gold currency. by 2023. An end to the African dream. Unsurprisingly, the pressure took its toll on a rather insecure Gaddafi, who jostled from hideout to hideout as the deposed leader of Libya, Muammar Gaddafi, was later captured and killed on 20 October 2011 after the Battle of Sirte. Gaddafi was found west of Sirte after his convoys were attacked by NATO aircraft. He was then captured by National Transitional Council forces and was killed shortly afterwards. Gaddafi had done more than organize an African military coup. He had demonstrated that financial independence could be achieved. His greatest infrastructure project, the Great Man-Made River, was turning arid regions into a breadbasket for Libya. And the $33 billion project was being funded interest-free without foreign debt through Libya's own state-owned bank. That could explain why this critical piece of infrastructure was destroyed in 2011. NATO not only bombed the pipeline, but finished off the project by bombing the factory producing the pipes necessary to repair it. Crippling a civilian irrigation system serving up to 70% of the population hardly looks like humanitarian intervention after all. Rather, as Canadian Professor Maximilian Forte puts it in his heavily researched book Slouching Towards Sirte, NATO's war on Libya and Africa. The goal of US military intervention was to disrupt an emerging pattern of independence and a network of collaboration within Africa that would facilitate increased African self-reliance. This is at odds with the geostrategic and political economic ambitions of extra-continental European powers, namely the US. With this then came the end of Gaddafi era and any hopes from Africa for a unified monetary system. The NTC initially claimed Gaddafi died from injuries sustained in a shootout when loyalist forces attempted to free him, although a graphic video of his last moments shows rebel fighters beating him and one of them sodomizing him with a bayonet before he was shot several times. This wraps up the video. What do you think? Was Gaddafi justly murdered? Let me know what you think in the comment section below. And also don't forget to subscribe, hit the like button and turn on post notifications in order not to miss out on any of my future videos.